Useless, Todd muttered, tossing the scrapbook onto the table like it was trash. I stared at him, my chest tightening. "What's this?" he said, gesturing dismissively at the handmade scrapbook I'd spent weeks creating. "This is the best you could come up with? A pile of pictures and sentimental garbage. You're ridiculous, Lydia." My hands clenched in my lap, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I thought you'd appreciate something meaningful," I said, my voice steady. "It's a collection of memories. Everything we've been through together." He rolled his eyes. "What we've been through? Please. I'm tired of all this overly emotional crap. You could have gotten me something useful, but instead, you waste your time on this nonsense. It's embarrassing." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the sting of his words. "Todd," I began, but he interrupted me, standing up and running a hand through his hair. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped. "This isn't working anymore. You're not working anymore. I need someone who can actually add value to my life, not drag me down with this pathetic attempt to be thoughtful." My stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smirked, crossing his arms. "I'm leaving, Lydia. I've met someone else, Mara. She's 20, exciting, and she actually knows how to have fun, unlike you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let him see the impact. "And you think this is the right way to tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady. "After I put my heart into this?" He laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Your heart. That's the problem, Lydia. You're all heart and no substance. I deserve more." I sat there in silence for a moment, his words echoing in my head. Then, to my own surprise, I started to laugh. It wasn't bitter or forced. It was genuine, loud, and it cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "What's so funny?" Todd asked, narrowing his eyes. I stood up, still laughing, and reached for the book. "You don't even know what you're walking away from," I said, flipping to the back page. "What are you talking about?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I pulled out the folded deed, tucked into the final page, and held it up. "This," I said. "The deed to a vacation house I bought for us. I was going to surprise you tonight, but I guess that's off the table now." His jaw dropped. You bought a vacation house?" I smiled sweetly, slipping the deed into my purse. "Looks like Mara won't be enjoying that, will she?" Todd's face twisted into something between disbelief and panic. For the first time all evening, he was at a loss for words. "You bought a house," he finally stammered. "Since when do you make decisions like that?" I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. "Since I realized I can't depend on you for anything meaningful, Todd. While you were busy finding excitement with a 20-year-old, I was building a future for us. Silly me for thinking we wanted the same things." He opened his mouth to retort, but closed it again. His eyes darted to the book still lying on the table, as if he were trying to figure out how this had slipped through his fingers. "You're overreacting," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "This doesn't change anything. Mara and I—" "Mara and you?" I cut him off, shaking my head. "Todd, I don't care. Take her. Take your exciting life and get out of mine. You've made it abundantly clear where I stand." I walked out of the living room and into the bedroom we once shared, the sound of Todd's sputtering excuses following me as I packed a small overnight bag. I could hear him pacing, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation without admitting he'd completely miscalculated. I paused for a moment, staring at the photos on the dresser, wedding pictures, trips we'd taken, moments that once seemed so full of promise. They felt like relics from another life, one I'd been clinging to for far too long. By the time I returned to the living room, Todd was standing by the door, his arms crossed, trying to look composed. "You're really just going to leave?" he asked, his tone incredulous. "I am," I said simply, brushing past him. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're being petty, Lydia. You'll regret this." I paused at the door, turning back to face him. "Maybe," I said, my voice firm. "But at least I won't regret staying in a marriage where I'm nothing but a punchline to you." With that, I stepped outside. The night air cool against my face, I felt the weight of Todd's expectations lift off my shoulders. As I drove away, the deed safely tucked in my bag, I realized I wasn't leaving with just my belongings. I was leaving with something far more valuable, the clarity that I deserved better. Let Todd have his fun. I was done playing the part of the loyal wife in his selfish little game. I drove straight to Grace's house. She was the only person I could think of who would truly understand what had just happened, without judgment. When she opened the door, she took one look at me and frowned. What did he do this time? "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice steady but tired. She stepped aside, waving me in. "Of course." "Kitchen or living room?" I asked. "Kitchen," she said, knowing she'd already be reaching for the wine. Minutes later, we were seated at her small kitchen table, a glass of Merlot in front of me, and her undivided attention across from me. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Spill." I took a deep breath and recounted everything, from the scrapbook to Todd's cruel words, to his grand announcement about Mara. By the time I got to the part about the vacation house, her jaw had dropped. "He called you useless after all you've done for him," she said, her voice rising with indignation. "And then had the audacity to tell you he was leaving for some 20-year-old. Are you kidding me?" I shook my head, swirling the wine in my glass. "Nope. That's Todd. Always so self-assured, always thinking I'd just roll over and accept it." "But you didn't," Grace said, a smile breaking through her anger. "You walked out. You took back the house. And honestly, Lydia, good for you." Hearing her say it out loud made something inside me shift. I hadn't just walked away from Todd. I'd walked away from years of trying to be someone he could appreciate, someone who would never be enough for him. "What now?" Grace asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been so wrapped up in making our marriage work, I don't even know who I am outside of it." Grace reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. "You'll figure it out, one step at a time. But first, you stay here tonight. No arguing." I smiled. "Thanks, Grace." Later that night, as I lay on the couch in her living room, I felt the exhaustion of the day finally catch up to me. But beneath the tiredness was something else. Relief. Todd was no longer my problem. For years, I'd bent over backward to make him happy, and now I didn't have to. I didn't know what the future held, but I was excited to find out. The morning after I left Todd, I woke up in Grace's living room to the sound of my phone vibrating relentlessly on the coffee table. Groaning, I reached for it, squinting at the screen. Missed calls, 6. Text messages, 14. All from Todd. I unlocked my phone, scrolling through the barrage of messages. "Where did you go? We need to talk. You're being childish, Lydia. You can't just walk away like this." The last one made me laugh bitterly. "Walk away?" That's exactly what he told me he was doing last night. Grace wandered into the room, a cup of coffee in hand. "Let me guess. Todd?" "Bingo," I muttered, holding up the phone. "He's losing it." "Well, What did he expect? She said, setting the coffee down in front of me. You don't get to treat someone like garbage and then act shocked when they stop putting up with it. I nodded, sipping the coffee. He's not used to consequences. He's always gotten away with everything, his arrogance, his selfishness. But this time, he's not getting what he wants. Damn right he's not, Grace said, a satisfied grin on her face. Later that day, I received another text, but this one caught my attention. I'll come by the house later. We need to sort this out. My house, I thought. He was still acting like it was his, like he had any right to come and go as he pleased. I thought about replying, telling him to stay away, but then I remembered something Grace had said the night before. Let him stew in it for a while. Instead, I ignored the text and spent the day with Grace, helping her with errands and catching up on parts of my life I'd neglected for years. By the time I returned to my house that evening, Todd's car was already parked in the driveway. I parked on the street, taking a deep breath before walking up to the door. He was pacing in the living room when I walked in, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. You finally decided to show up? He said, his voice sharp. I live here, I replied calmly, setting my purse down on the counter. What are you doing here? We need to talk, he said, his tone softening. This has gotten out of hand. I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. What's gotten out of hand, Todd? The fact that I finally stood up for myself? Or the fact that you're realizing Mara isn't the prize you thought she was? His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might explode. But instead, he sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. Look, I made a mistake, okay? He said, his voice dropping. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we can fix this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Fix this, Todd. This isn't a broken vase. This is years of you taking me for granted, dismissing everything I do, and expecting me to keep smiling through it. Lydia, he started, but I cut him off. No, I said firmly. You don't get to decide when we fix things. You made your choice. Now you can live with it. I grabbed my bag and walked upstairs, leaving him sitting there in stunned silence. The day after Todd's tantrum, I packed his things, left them neatly by the front door, and changed the locks. When he came back that evening, looking smug as ever, I met him on the porch with a firm expression and a folder in hand. What's this? He asked, glancing down at the papers I held. Your things, I said, gesturing to the suitcase by the door. And this is the contact information for the lawyer I hired this morning. You'll be hearing from her soon. His jaw tightened, but he still couldn't resist one last dig. You're being ridiculous, Lydia. You can't handle life without me. I smiled faintly. We'll see about that. Now get off my porch. He stared at me, his confidence finally faltering, before grabbing his suitcase and stalking off. I had my life back, and I wasn't looking back. The divorce process moved faster than I had expected. My lawyer helped me organize everything, finances, documentation, and ensured I'd be protected moving forward. Now, sitting in her office, reviewing the finalized paperwork, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, closure, and a lingering disbelief that this chapter of my life was really coming to an end. Everything looks solid, my lawyer said, flipping through the papers. Todd doesn't have much leverage, especially since he hasn't contested anything. Frankly, I think he knows he's not in a position to fight you. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. I think he's finally realized I'm not the pushover he thought I was. She chuckled. I'd say you've made that very clear. As I left her office that afternoon, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift. The paperwork was filed, my finances were secure, and Todd was officially out of my life, on paper and in reality. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. That same evening, Grace came over with a bottle of wine and her usual flair for celebrating my victories. To Lydia, she said, raising her glass, the woman who finally kicked Todd to the curb and reclaimed her life? I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. To Grace, I responded, the friend who never once said, I told you so. Not yet, anyway, she teased, taking a sip. As the night went on, we talked about everything, my plans for the future, her latest escapades, and of course, Todd's dramatic fall. So Grace, she said, leaning back on the couch with a smirk, do you think he's still crying over Mara? Probably, I grinned. But it's not like he has much else going for him now. No wife, no house, no mistress. Honestly, I almost feel bad for him. Almost, Grace said, laughing. That night after Grace left, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The old me, the one who bent over backward to keep Todd happy, who worried endlessly about his approval, felt like a distant memory. This new version of myself, the one who could laugh at his downfall and find joy in reclaiming my life, was here to stay. Todd had underestimated me, but I hadn't. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The weeks following the divorce were a whirlwind of change, but the chaos felt like mine to control. Without Todd's shadow looming over every decision, I found myself rediscovering the parts of me that had been buried under years of his criticism and demands. It wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about thriving. One of the first things I did was visit the vacation house. For so long, it had been an abstract symbol of hope, a promise of something better for our future. But now, it was mine completely, untethered from Todd or his arrogance. When I pulled up to the property, nestled against the backdrop of a serene lake and surrounded by towering pines, I felt a rush of pride. I had done this. I had made this dream a reality, not for Todd, not for us, but for me. It's beautiful, Grace said, admiring the view. What took you so long to show me? I don't know, I admitted, laughing. I think I wanted it to be perfect before I shared it with anyone. And honestly, part of me was afraid Todd would ruin it. Well, it's perfect now, she said, plopping onto the couch. And you deserve every bit of it. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming through the windows. I felt like I truly deserved something good. As the weeks turned into months, I started filling my life with things I'd put on hold for too long. I thought about the life I'd left behind. There was no anger anymore, no bitterness, just gratitude for the lessons I'd learned and the freedom I'd gained. A few months after the divorce was finalized, life felt like it had finally settled into a new rhythm. The vacation house had become my sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts or invite friends over to share the peace I'd found. Grace visited often, usually with a bottle of wine and stories about her latest adventures. You know, I said, sipping my wine, I guess I've realized I can only control my own happiness. Trying to make Todd happy was like pouring water into a bucket with a hole in it. It was never enough. Those lessons extend beyond the house, too, I continued. I started freelancing, something I'd always wanted to do but never pursued because Todd thought it was too unstable. Now, my schedule is my own, and the freedom is exhilarating. One of my clients, a design firm, invited me to lead a workshop for their team. The experience was incredible, and I even got a suggestion from the CEO, Phoenix Consulting. You've risen from the ashes like the badass you are, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Phoenix Consulting it is. I laughed, though I couldn't help smiling. As I poured myself into building the business, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Every small win, a new client, a glowing review, a successful project, was a reminder of how far I'd come. And for every win, there was a quiet moment of gratitude for the strength I'd found in myself. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I realized that the view had shifted from something that used to feel like a luxury to something I had earned. I had built a life I was proud of. Phoenix Consulting was thriving far beyond what I'd imagined when I started. The freedom to choose my clients, my hours, and my projects made me feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. Grace visited that evening, as she often did, carrying a box of pastries from a local bakery. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm really proud of you. You've come so far." I smiled, feeling more like myself than I ever had before. The woman who constantly sought Todd's approval felt like a stranger now. This new life wasn't just about escaping a bad marriage. It was about rediscovering who I was, what I wanted, and what made me happy. And I felt like I finally knew the answers. As the stars began to dot the sky, I grabbed a notebook and pen, jotting down ideas for the future, new marketing strategies for Phoenix Consulting, places I wanted to travel to next, goals I hadn't dared to dream of until now. Later, as I closed the notebook, I thought about how public speaking had never been my strong suit. Todd had often mocked me for fumbling over my words during casual conversations, let alone something as formal as a keynote speech. But this time, his voice didn't matter. I hit reply and typed, "I'd be honored to participate." Preparing for the keynote became a new focus, and with Grace's encouragement, I poured my energy into crafting a speech that felt authentic. "Don't sugarcoat anything," Grace advised. "Tell your story the way it is. Failures, triumphs, all of it." As I spoke, sharing the story of how Phoenix Consulting was born from a place of rediscovery, I noticed heads nodding in the audience. People were leaning in, smiling, and even jotting down notes. I felt like my voice mattered, not just to me, but to others. After the speech, several attendees approached me to share their own stories of struggle and resilience. "You inspired me today," one woman said, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me it's never too late." And just like that, I knew this was my story now, and I was writing every word.